let's get to the last story, which is Cornel West is attacked again. I know some of you guys are probably like, what happened this time? What happened this time, right? So this time, Cornel West is being attacked over funding. Now, this is not complex. We're going to get into the thick of it. But I want to start off with this statement from Waleed Shahid. Now, he's a former strategist for Justice Democrats. I want to show you something that he said and which sparked one of the attacks, which is from Nicole Hannah-Jones. Now, Waleed, he said this. Let me start right here. So Waleed, who was a strategist for Justice Democrats, a group that sponsored left-wing primary challenges to Democratic members of Congress, said Mr. Biden's embrace of Israel might drive young Muslim progressive voters away from Mr. Biden and toward Cornel West, the independent candidate for president who is running on a more explicitly anti-war platform. That's important because, so he shared that post on Twitter, what I just read to you basically, but he extends it and he says, there will be a non-insignificant number of Arabs, Muslims, and young voters who sit out 2024 or vote for Cornel West instead of Joe Biden in states like Michigan and Georgia, giving his near one-sided support of Netanyahu's far right government. Now, this is Nicole Hannah-Jones. Now, some of you may remember her because she actually had a tenure issue. Now, you would think that she would sympathize with Cornel West, given that they both had to go with this. She was denied tenure at the University of North Carolina, and she went to the press about it because she said that, like, basically they denied me tenure because of the project that I've been working on, or they don't agree with it, or obviously they felt like they already had their black person for their faculty. Now, these things do happen in higher ed. I've talked about this before. She went on to multiple interviews to talk about being denied tenure. Dr. West went through the same experience being denied tenure at Harvard. His reasoning was because his support of the Palestinian people. So Harvard was like, no, we're not going to give you tenure. So you'd think she'd be understanding. But Nicole Hannah-Jones is just another Democrat shill. She's another one, Biden supporter. Now, she had this project called the 1619 Project, which talks about, like, goes all the way back to through slavery and all of that. Like, so she's really good when it comes to those discussions about what happened to Black people historically and things that need repair. But a lot of these academics that are good with that particular issue, when it comes to criticizing the Democratic Party and how the Democratic Party has failed the Black community, they think that you're crazy to do that. She does not approve of Dr. West running third party. She doesn't approve of this third party independent stuff anyway. And she wants you to vote for the Democrats so that you don't get Donald Trump. So some of these academics, like I said before, they've written all these books about what we need to do or what happened to us as a Black community and how we need to move forward. They'll do all of that. But at the end of the day, the bag that they're getting, and I'm going to show you where her bag is coming from, the bag that they're getting tells them to remain in the status quo, and they're not going to move forward either. So she responded and she said, Cornel West, who's taking Harlan Crow money, not saying you're wrong, but it's trash. Now, Harlan Crow, we'll get into who he is right now, because there was an article that was published by Business Insider, and I want to show you. So they came after Cornel West about this. They said Harlan Crow, the GOP mega donor and pal to Clarence Thomas, maxed out his campaign donation to a self-described non-Marxist socialist trying to defeat Joe Biden. So just with the title alone, I think it's interesting that they're willing to point out who Harlan Crow is friends with, but they weren't willing to point out the fact of some of the relationships that Joe Biden had with people like Strom Thurmond. I think it's interesting that they're willing to call out donors in reference to Cornel West, but they ain't say nothing about the donors that Joe Biden has, and Joe Biden is taking corporate money. Let's go on. Here we go. Billionaire GOP mega donor Harlan Crow maxed out a donation to Cornel West, the progressive academic and 2024 independent presidential candidate, according to the latest FEC filings. The records show that Crow gave $3,300 to West in August, weeks before West switched from pursuing the Green Party presidential nomination to running as an independent. West in the past has labeled himself as a non-Marxist socialist, which would seemingly clash with the more conservative and pro-capitalist politics of Crow. So I'm going to offer a criticism on both sides with this part right here. Number one, as I've told you before, donors donate to people across different parties. Donors don't just say, I'm only going to donate to someone who's running as a Republican. They'll donate to Republicans. They'll donate to Democrats. They'll donate to independents. David Sachs is a great example of this. He's donated to RFK. He's donated to Vivek. He's donated, like they donate across, right? So that's the first thing. That being said, the second part, the fact that Harlan Crow is a billionaire. And so this is an individual donation to Dr. West's campaign. But the problem is the optics of it. I personally don't think you should take money from billionaires. Like, I've been very vocal about that. Cornel West did issue a statement. We'll get into that in a second. But Cornel West will say that, you know, this is not PAC money. This is coming from an individual person who I know, who I'm familiar with. But I think the problem that you're going to run into, and I sincerely hope, you know, Dr. West takes this into consideration. When people see that you're getting like those types of donations, like, for example, instead of the $27 donations that Bernie Sanders had, like the small donations, when people see that, it kind of can make people less willing to donate to you who are like working class. People who are working class are going to see that $3,300 from a billionaire, and they're going to say, well, he doesn't need my $27 or my $100 then. That's the problem I think you'll run into. One of the things that made Bernie Sanders' campaign so successful is the fact that he focused on those small dollar donations. That's where most of his money came from. When I donated to Bernie Sanders' campaign, I donated the smallest, that $27. That was what I would donate every time I donated to him. And so remember, during the 2020 campaign, at one point, Bernie Sanders had the most money out of all of the candidates that were running, and it was a grassroots campaign. So Bernie Sanders was able to raise a lot of money from those small dollar donations. What I'm saying is that when you have those types of levels, like the 3,000 and stuff like that, that can give other people the impression that you don't need our money. And then it makes us not feel willing to donate like a small dollar donation. Whereas when Bernie was getting donations from people, it was that, can you contribute just the $27 or the $10, like that kind of thing? Like, you felt more pumped and motivated to do so. So I think it's really important. I will say this, even though I do think this is a smear piece, I will say this. I think that it's important that if you're running a campaign about working class issues and working class people, I think it's important that you have those dollar amounts that working class people can afford. That is one critique that I would give, because something like that can turn people off if they, especially if they don't have that kind of money. It goes on to say, but Crow, in an April interview with the Wall Street Journal, described West as a professor emeritus at Princeton University and a former professor at Harvard University as a good friend. West, who has been critical of the Democratic Party despite his liberal positions, has drawn the ire of some Democrats who believe his candidacy could siphon off votes from President Joe Biden's reelection effort and aid his Republican challenger. But West is undeterred, pointing to some of the most urgent problems in American society that he feels remain unaddressed. During an interview in August on NBC's Meet the Press, West said that the two-party system in the U.S. was becoming an impediment for the flowering of American democracy. We've got too many fellow citizens, 63% living paycheck to paycheck, he told the network. I must say that it's hard to view oneself as a spoiler when there is an increasing rot in the system with two parties connected to big money, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and militarism abroad. And this is what I was trying to warn. See, they will now take that statement and they'll use that against him because they'll now say that, well, you took money from a billionaire, so you're connected to big money too. See, I know how people spend things, even though that's an individual donation from one guy, the press will spin it in a way. Crow leapt onto the national stage after ProPublica in April published a major report that detailed how Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas had taken luxury vacations funded by the wealthy real estate developer for more than 20 years without disclosing the trips. Thomas, in response to revelations about previously undisclosed trips, said at the time that he was advised that it wasn't necessary to report this sort of personal hospitality. Okay, but that has nothing to do with Cornel West's campaign. So you see what they're trying to do. It goes on to say, in The Atlantic, Crow said that he wasn't a law guy and didn't discuss Supreme Court cases with Thomas, but largely conversed about Motown and sports with the conservative jurists. Crow late last month met with representatives from the presidential campaigns of Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, as several major GOP donors are looking to get behind the strongest challenger to Donald Trump's presidential bid. So I told you guys more smear pieces will come out. Cornel West did issue a response, and I do want to get into that. He said, as an independent candidate and a free Black man, I accept donations within the limits of no PACs or corporate interest groups that have strings attached. I am unbought and unbossed. Despite my deep political differences with Brother Harlan Crow, who is an anti-Trump Republican, I've known him in a non-political setting for some years, and I pray for his precious family. I find it hypocritical for those who highlight his $3,300 donation to my campaign, but can't say a mumbling word about the PAC-driven $1 billion to support the genocidal attack in Gaza sponsored by their candidate. I'm fighting for truth, justice, love, and onward. So that's the response there from Dr. West. And I would add in, to that as well, was the fact that, oh, so now we care. So now mainstream media cares about where money comes from for these candidates, but they're not talking about where Joe Biden's money's coming from. They're not talking about where Trump's money's coming. They're not talking about any of that, but they're coming after Dr. West. I told you they're going to come after any little thing. But I will say again, I think that if you're trying to appeal to working class people, I think it is important that one thing I would take from Bernie's campaigns and apply it to like future campaigns is the small dollar donations, focusing on that, because that does encourage people to support you, particularly those that are working class. And it's just, I think what Dr. West may not see is it's just the optics. It's the optics of it, right? So they're going to try to anything. But speaking of optics, I thought it was really interesting because Nikole Hannah-Jones, again, I told you how she is and who she is. She had all those things to say about Dr. West and who he's taking money from. So let's just put this back up here to remind you. And she said, Cornel West, who's taking Harlan Crow money, not saying you're wrong, but it's trash. Well, Q Anthony actually called out Nikole Hannah-Jones to show who she's been taking money from. Now, this was the Emancipation Conversations lecture series, and it says right here, sponsored by Shell. and other people have pointed this out before too, that Nicole Hannah-Jones is taking money from Shell. So can I just show this here? And it has her name. Our first lecture features Nicole Hannah-Jones, an award-winning investigative reporter covering racial injustice for the New York Times and the architect of the 1619 Project. The landmark project marks the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first ship carrying enslaved Africans to America. Again, sponsored by Shell. So this has been pointed out. So, I mean, again, the point is, like I said before, Nicole Hannah-Jones, like a lot of these academics, like I told you before, at the end of the day, they're still supporting the Democratic Party. So they're not like radical. She's liberal, like she's neoliberal, right? So she's taking money from Shell. So who is she to criticize Cornel West in reference to who he just got a donation from? So it's hypocritical. It's very hypocritical. And one more thing I want to share about Nicole too. I just want to show you the AP interview, Nicole Hannah-Jones warning on democracy. You see, she has the same talking points as the Democratic Party. And I just want to show you this part here. She reminds me of Kendi too, man. She reminds me of Kendi. So it says, New York Times writer began this year in a protracted tenure fight with her alma mater in North Carolina. The dispute ended when she announced in July that she'd take her talents to a historically Black university and is closing it as the nation best-selling author. So let me just show you where she brings up the democracy part, because that part was interesting. Hannah-Jones said the backlash to her work is evidence that the U.S. is approaching a make or break crossroads on its global standing as a democracy. I think that we are in a very frightening time. People who are much, much smarter than me, who have studied this much, much longer than I have, are ringing the alarm. I think we have to ask ourselves, the narrators, the storytellers, the journalists, are we ringing the alarm in the right way? Are we doing our jobs to try to uphold our democracy? So there you go, folks. She's using the same talking points as the Democratic Party. She's very much going to be against any opposition that she feels is not inside the Democratic Party, whether it's Dr. West or whoever. So I wanted to point that out. We'll bring in Eric. Eric, whenever you're ready, because I know Eric had something to say about this as well.
Hello. Yes. Happy Friday. We wanted to make sure, I'm not sure if it was in the tweet we showed or not, but they did end up like giving back the donation.
Do what?
The West campaign gave back the donation to.
They did?
Yeah.
Where is that?
Yeah, let me find it.
I didn't see that part. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's right on his timeline. There we go. Show. He said, how sad that perception so quickly triumphed over truth in our decadent culture. This holds in our major catastrophe in the Middle East, where the rich humanity of Palestinians is rendered invisible. It also holds at home in the minor scandal about Harlan Crow's donation to my campaign. He is a staunch anti-Trump. Anyways, about Harlan Crow. And then as a jazz man, I listened and decided to give the money back to Brother Harlan, but still state the truth. Was what the latest thing that was.
So he did give it back.
Yeah, I mean, in the scheme of things, I mean, it's a tiny sum in the scheme of in the scale of a national campaign, but I mean. What I would like to hear, getting back to like what's our core problem in this whole system, is that you have these very small number of billionaires and 100 millionaires, that top 0.1% at the very top, funneling these billions of dollars into the political system and into the whole system. You got media and the whole thing, but you especially see in the political system where they're supposed to represent us, and it's straight up corruption. And so I would urge Dr. West and the campaign to come back to that. So when you have someone like Harlan Crow, who, if you look up his history, his father is like described as at one point the largest landlord in the country. At one point, I mean, his father was a hugely wealthy man, and so it's the usual thing what we see with most billionaires is they're the white sons of white rich men, and so their very existence as a class is the problem. And so I would have liked to have seen Dr. West come back to that, to say that it's that his class is the problem. His having that much wealth and the huge wealth inequality is the problem. And it's not about whether or not he's a good guy or a Republican or not, or what he believes in. We can either have a good and decent and functional country with a real democracy, or we can have billionaires. I mean, I'd like to see the choices put in as stark as that. And so then, that gets you into focusing on the money and the corruption. And then you need to demand that we fix it, and you get into the solutions. So I'd love to see the campaign really focus on those things. And I know you've said the same thing as well. So I just wanted to pop in with that.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, That's a really good point. Like, yeah, I wouldn't, I know me personally, if it was me, I wouldn't take donations from a billionaire, period. It's like these are the people that we're saying, billionaires shouldn't even exist. So
and if they had put the donation buttons, or the max donation is like even like $500 or something, then this billionaire or whoever wouldn't have even been able to donate that much. And would they have done a news story if it was $500? It's like,
I'm pulling up the donate option now. I'm trying to see.
Yeah, they still have the big high number buttons in there, which is not a good look for a grassroots campaign.
Yeah, because see, this is the thing, like even with like the Bernie thing, and not saying it has to be exactly like Bernie's, but I wouldn't have that. I wouldn't have 3,300. I wouldn't, because see, that's the thing. You're going to get more like the $25. This is where a lot of people sat with Bernie. Like, this is where we were donating like $25, that kind of thing. But it's kind of discouraging if you come on here and you do see that $3,300. That can discourage some people, especially working class people, and say, well, if somebody's donating $3,000, why do you need money from me?
And if this campaign can get millions and millions and millions of people donating that $25, then we'll have something that the sky's the limit. And if they don't do that, then really, what's the point?
Yeah, just like Bernie's did. Bernie got most of his donations came from the small dollar amount, not the large dollar amount.
He made that a point in the campaign. $27 average donation.
Yeah,
I would. So.
Yeah, I mean, if it were me, I would just not, I wouldn't have, but that's, it's not my campaign. So, but that's my take on that.